when we get into the habit of toxic behavior, it becomes part of how we just operate, and it becomes this rhythm. And this is one of the reasons that it's so vital as you are on this mission to increase your radiance. You and I are on this mission. It's so vital that you be aware of this negative energy that's in the world. It's around us.
You're watching Developing Potential with Diana Kulian.
Hi, friend. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today. All right, we're talking about toxic behavior. And this is such a popular term that gets thrown around, although typically you'll hear people say toxic person or toxic people. And so right off the bat, this is a show to empower you, and this is a show to really remind you that you are made of clay. You are not set in stone. And that means the people in your life are not set in stone. We are constantly becoming, right? We're moving towards that next version of ourselves. And so my intention here is to really identify toxic behavior so that you can scan through your life, honestly look at yourself, look at your relationships, and sniff out where some toxic behavior might be cropping up. And there's a really important reason that we do this. And that is because, we talk about ourself as a system and how we want to have our three circuits, our body, our emotional network, and our thinking mind. We want them all to be in the green. We want them all to be firing and healthy. But there's also the bigger system that you exist in. There's these outside influences, and we haven't really touched on them a lot yet with this program, but the relationships in your life. So you may have heard this, the top 5 people that you spend your time with, you're going to be like them. These relationships that we have in our life impact our system. So we can have the best of intentions of, having a healthy body, having emotions that are productive and positive, and really having a thinking mind that's firing on all cylinders and that's using good information and helping us and is goal-driven. But if our top 5 people that we spend our life with, that we spend our time with, if they're operating with these systems that are in the red, there's this concept of co-regulation. And this is a therapy word, but essentially, if you imagine a system that's in the red as a system that's like a higher temperature, right? Like things are heated up. If the 5 people around you are heated up, your system, by just association, by being near them, your system is going to heat up as well. All right, so let's get into it. First, let's define toxic behavior. Essentially, toxic behavior is behavior that causes harm to others. And I kind of want to add in covertly, meaning it's kind of sneaky. It's not an obvious, this person's being a jerk to me. It's a more subtle, I feel kind of confused and upset after I'm around this person. And I think that's why there's so much interest in this idea of toxic behavior, because it's a little mysterious. It's a little bit under the surface, and that's why we can get caught in this trap. So we're really focusing on how can we spot toxic behavior in the relationships in our life and in ourselves, because I know you're doing your 10 minutes of meditation, and I know your self-awareness superpower is increasing. So your antenna is open to look at yourself as well. That's the highest level of self-development there. And it's important because toxic behavior is contagious, right? When there's somebody who's bringing this toxic energy into your system, you will co-regulate with them, which means that they will influence your system, and a negative influence is always going to outweigh a positive influence because just that negative energy is heavier, and it's going to get your system off track. So that's why it's super important we talk about this. So let's look at these 7 ways that we can spot that there's toxic behavior happening. The first one is that drama and disruption is swirling around this person, right? Toxic behavior inflames the emotions of others and creates conflict. So anytime that there's, conflict and drama that seems to repeat itself, you can be sure that there's toxic behavior involved. The second way to know that there's toxic behavior taking place is that negativity is the focus. So toxic behavior is all about complaining, judging, being rude or disrespectful, and it's this heavier, low-toned energy. And so again, this isn't an obvious thing. It's something you feel. So you can feel that this is the topic that's being brought up is always negative, or the way that people are being spoken about is negative. And so that's the second sign. When negativity is around, radiance is being dimmed. And if you think about it, positivity, positive energy is when radiance comes out. And if you're having a conversation with someone and the conversation turns to the negative, right? That glass goes from being half full to half empty. And now the world around you looks less colorful. Like negative energy drags people down. So that's a sign, okay? The third sign and way to spot toxic behavior is dishonesty, manipulation, and undermining. So the truth isn't really the truth, right? And this term gaslighting is also very popular. But when, one thing is said, but it doesn't match up to what you remember, and there's just this confusion about the truth, that is a sign that you're dealing with some toxic behavior. The fourth sign is black and white thinking. And we've talked about this as a cognitive distortion in our thinking mind, but when we paint someone as all bad or paint someone as all good, we're not being realistic, right? We're filtering out a lot of other things because we know that there's many sides to every single person and every situation, right? There's good and there's bad and there's pros and there's cons. So when you are experiencing a conversation or you're experiencing someone's perspective and it's very black and white, that is a sign to you that things are getting toxic. The fifth sign is not taking responsibility, right? We've all dealt with someone who just is never at fault. They will never apologize. They're very quick to blame someone else. The problem is always outside of themselves. And maybe we've done this. Maybe you've been in a situation where you even knew I should just apologize and take responsibility, but something stopped you, right? There's some toxic energy there that's keeping you from allowing yourself to be honest and to humble yourself. And so when you're experiencing, dealing with someone or yourself where there's just this refusal to take responsibility, that's a sign that there's toxic behavior. The sixth sign is this constant pushback or need for control. So maybe you've dealt with somebody who's in a rut of toxic behavior and you kind of drag your feet in bringing something up with them because you know it's going to be a big deal. Right? You know that they need to micromanage it or they need to be in control of it and they need to call the shots. This rigid way of operating in the world where you have to be at the steering wheel and nobody's going to tell you what to do. This is toxic behavior. The seventh sign that you're dealing with some toxic behavior is bridges are burned. So when relationships are not salvaged. And so things happen in relationships where we have emotional wounds, right? There's a misunderstanding or someone gets their feelings hurt. It happens all the time. But there's a very human way to connect with another person. And it typically begins with an apology, a sincere apology of taking responsibility. Hey, this is what I did. I can see that I did this. I can see the pain that it caused you. I'm sorry. Here's how I'm not going to do it in the future. And this is what we call mending an emotional wound to move forward and to move past it, to move past that misunderstanding. And when there's toxic behavior involved, there's a refusal to show up for that conversation because it's humbling and it's vulnerable. And to put yourself in a place where you're humbled and you're vulnerable is opposite to operating with toxic energy. All right, so that was the 7 ways to spot this toxic behavior. The first way, there's drama and disruption. They're inflaming the emotions of others. There's negativity at the focus, right? Anytime there's these negative, low emotions, the truth is not the truth. There's dishonesty, there's manipulation, there's undermining, there's confusion. The 4th was black and white thinking. Because, guys, we know there's shades and shades of gray in this world. And the healthier our psyche, the healthier our emotions, the more we can see those shades of gray and be okay with it. The 5th was there's just no accountability. This person's never to blame. This person does not apologize. And if you get an apology, it's probably not sincere. And the 6th was just that need for control of a situation. And the 7th is, hey, I'd rather let my relationships just die and fall apart rather than sit there, show up for the difficult conversation of apologizing, taking responsibility, walking in the other person's shoes. That's empathy. Empathy is I can experience what you've experienced, and I'm sorry. So when you look at these 7 behaviors and you scan through your life, and you scan through the relationships in your life, and hopefully you're able to look at yourself and your own way of showing up in relationships and relating to other people, we need to pay attention for these 7 warning signs. And maybe you're like, hey, I know someone where all 7 of them light up. And I started the episode by saying we don't label people as toxic because we know that everyone is in this process of becoming. Nobody is set in stone. Now, there's also this concept, and Napoleon Hill calls it the hypnotic rhythm in his book, Outwitting the Devil. And he explains it so beautifully. We get caught in habit cycles. And I just picture sitting on the beach and seeing the wave get pulled out and then crashing in, and how it's just this cycle. And you can watch a stone that's caught in this cycle and just over and over. And that's how these stones go from being jagged to being just smooth and beautiful. But there's this rhythm that takes place. And when we get into the habit of toxic behavior, it becomes part of how we just operate. And it becomes this rhythm. And this is one of the reasons that it's so vital as you are on this mission to increase your radiance. You and I are on this mission. It's so vital that you be aware of this negative energy that's in the world. It's around us. And negative energy looks for a home. And negative energy finds a home in someone. And it gets them caught in this cycle of toxic behavior. And then we can look and we can label them and say, oh, there's a toxic person. But really, it's a person that's stuck in a cycle. And just like anything, they can get out of that cycle and they can release that negative energy and they can make different choices, right? And so the first step to this is awareness. And if you're seeing, hey, I've got some of this negative cycle in my life, having that awareness, taking that step back from being in the cycle to observing the cycle. And then from there, if this is someone in your life, the next step is communication, because we don't write people off as toxic. We might say, hey, here's a few of these things that are happening in this relationship that we have. Let me talk to you about how this makes me feel, how after I'm around you, I feel confused, I feel anxious, I feel, down. And I think these are some of the reasons why. Let's talk about it. And if someone is so caught in that cycle where they're just not ready to have the awareness, or they're not at a place where change is something they can feel is possible, then the third step, and this is a really, really vital life skill for fostering your radiance, and that is boundaries. And I wish I had learned the term boundaries a long, long time ago, but I learned them later in life. But boundaries it's just as they sound. right? You can create boundaries in relationships with people who have negative energy to protect your own system. When you think of this concept of co-regulation, if this person's system is always heated up, and when you're around them, it's like they're throwing fireballs over to your emotional network circuit and it's heating you up. It will. You're human. If you're around someone with this fiery negative energy, you will get fired up. And so identifying where these negative sources are in your life and creating loving, nurturing, compassionate boundaries around your system so that you can keep fostering your radiance and growing into the person that you were meant to become, because it's there. And you can identify that other person has radiance too, but maybe they're just at a place where that radiance is going to be covered up for a while. And maybe by you putting those boundaries in place to protect your system so you can grow in radiance, maybe that's going to inspire them. And they're going to take your lead and be like, you know what? Maybe I need to let go of some of this negative energy. Maybe there's a different way that I can show up in the world. There's a different way that I can relate to others that's empowering, where I don't need to cut them down to feel better about myself or to get what I think I need in life. And so it's a beautiful thing to do. And so creating boundaries in your life where you need them is a blessing to yourself and also to the people in your life. All right, we have come to the end of our time here. So your extra credit for the week, friend, should you choose to accept it, is to scan your relationships for toxic behavior and where you can identify some. And that also means scanning yourself, where you are the source or the participant with toxic behavior, and to implement awareness, because it all starts with being aware, and then moving to communication for those relationships that are worth salvaging, for those people who you want to help them get out of that negative cycle. And then finally to boundaries, and not looking at boundaries as a negative thing or as a taking anything away from anyone, but you are putting a beautiful fence around your system so that you can allow it to thrive and to just have the best conditions possible. It's your responsibility so that you can be the best version of yourself and you can show up in a positive way to the people in your life. Friend, I hope that you enjoyed this. Please drop me a comment. What do you think? Have you seen toxic behavior in your life? This is such an interesting topic to think about. Are you on board with this idea that we shouldn't call people toxic people because everybody is clay? Everyone has the opportunity to make different choices. So I want to hear what you think. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will be back next week with more content.
Thanks for watching Developing Potential with Diana Koulian.